Katt Williams didn't expose a lie. He exposed something far worse, a contradiction so loud, so undeniable, that it turned A. Johnson into a walking question mark with no clean answers left.
And if the truth is involved, then I'm not even allowed to be worried. What would I be worried about? It's those that traffic in falsehoods that gotta worry about me, because
And here's the part that makes this whole thing feel almost surgical. Katt Williams didn't dig, didn't fabricate, didn't chase rumors in dark corners. He didn't need to. He simply pointed at something EJ already said, publicly, confidently, casually, and let the contradiction breathe on its own. That's what made it brutal. Because when your own words turn against you, there's no enemy left to blame. There's no angle to spin. There's just you, and the timeline, and the silence that follows. Think about that. What do you do when denial is impossible? When laughing it off only highlights the joke? When staying quiet makes you look like you've already lost? That's the trap. And it's not a trap someone else built. It's one that slowly formed.
Well, again, I wasn't really looking. There was just so much, that happened at that time that I wasn't looking. I don't care about to be accepted in a community or to be a part of a community. I think that I just wasn't in it. I wasn't a part, when I was living my life, growing up. It's just I was, I had school and I had all these places and I had my friends. It's I was I don't know what I'm doing. These communities or these people are mad. I'm
piece by piece every time a statement didn't quite match the last one. Go back, not vaguely, precisely. March 2025. That's where everything starts tightening. On Carlos King's podcast, A sits there and calmly lays out a claim that sounds simple on the surface, but starts collapsing the second you replay it. Straight men only, not attracted to people who identify as LGBTQ+, competing with cisgender women for male attention, mainstream spaces, not queer spaces. It sounds bold, it sounds confident, but it also sounds disconnected from everything that came before, because this didn't come out of nowhere. This wasn't a fresh identity dropped into a vacuum. Edge has been public for over a decade. Since 2013, when those photos surfaced, the ones that turned a private moment into a global headline, the identity wasn't hidden. It wasn't subtle. It was visible, vocal, carried across shows like Rich Kids of Beverly Hills, across interviews, red carpets, entire advocacy conversations. It became the narrative, not just something personal, something branded. And then suddenly, the language shifts, not gradually, not explained, just replaced. Pronouns dismissed, labels erased. He's passed away. And just like that, over a decade of public identity is treated like something that can be quietly archived and ignored. But here's the problem nobody can ignore. The internet remembers. The audience.
No, and that's why this conversation to me is so important, because people can watch this and say, finally, someone's saying something how I feel, because I got little the hairs rose up on my skin when you said, I don't want to say coming out anymore. This is who I am, and I don't even need your acceptance.
Remembers. And most importantly, comedians remember. Pause there. Really pause. Because this is where the contradiction stops being subtle and starts becoming structural. The same person now claiming attraction exclusively to straight men once spoke openly from within LGBTQ+ spaces to LGBTQ+ audiences as part of that same community. That's not a small shift. That's not evolution in tone. That's a complete rewrite of context. And rewriting context without explaining the edit, that's where suspicion creeps in. Not because people don't understand change, they do. People evolve all the time. But evolution usually comes with a story, a reason, a moment where someone says, here's why things are different now. That moment never came. Instead, the new version just appeared, fully formed, expecting no questions. But questions don't disappear just because they're inconvenient. They sit there, waiting, and all it takes is one person, one sharp, observant, slightly ruthless voice to say what everyone else is thinking quietly. That's exactly what Katt Williams did. He didn't invent anything. He didn't exaggerate. He just connected the dots that were already visible. And once those dots connect publicly, there's no unseeing them. Because now every possible response becomes a problem. If AJ says it was taken out of context, the quote is still there. If AJ doubles down, the logic collapses instantly. If AJ explains the shift, it opens a door to questions about everything that came before. And that's where the silence starts to feel loud, not peaceful, not strategic. Loud. Because silence in this situation doesn't calm the storm, it feeds it. Every day without an answer doesn't make the story fade. It makes it feel more permanent, more confirmed, like there is no explanation that actually works without unraveling something bigger. And here's where it gets even more uncomfortable, because the story doesn't stop at edge. It widens. It stretches into family, into legacy, into the one person whose voice could shift the entire narrative with a single sentence, Magic Johnson. And yet, nothing. No statement, no defense, no subtle hint of alignment. Just silence. From someone who has never struggled to speak before. Someone who has publicly talked about growth, acceptance, adjustment, love. Someone who once framed this entire journey as something that changed him. So now the question flips. Not just what is age saying, but why is everyone else not saying anything at all? Because when the person with the most power to respond chooses not to, that silence doesn't feel accidental. It feels calculated. And once you start looking at it that way, the whole story stops looking like a misunderstanding and starts looking like something nobody involved knows how to fix anymore. And now the story shifts from contradiction to something colder, heavier, and far more unsettling, because the silence surrounding A. Johnson is no longer just awkward, it's starting to look intentional. Let that sit for a second, because silence in a situation like this isn't neutral. It's not just someone waiting for the right moment, it's a decision. And when that decision comes from someone like Magic Johnson, a man who has built an entire public identity around saying the right thing at the right time, it forces a question that nobody seems comfortable asking out loud. Why is he not stepping in? This is the same father who once described how edge made him change. The same father who publicly embraced the narrative of growth, evolution, unconditional love. That image wasn't quiet. It was everywhere. Interviews, speeches, moments designed to show the world what acceptance looks like at the highest level. So when that same voice suddenly disappears during one of the most public humiliations his child has faced, it doesn't feel like coincidence. It feels like calculation. Because think about what defending edge right now would actually require. Not emotionally, logically. It would mean stepping in front of cameras and trying to explain a contradiction that doesn't resolve cleanly. It would mean defending a statement that collapses under its own definition. It would mean reconciling a decade of one identity with a sudden, unexplained shift into something that seems to reject the very framework it once relied on. That's not a simple defense. That's a risk. A public one. And maybe, just maybe, the silence is the only position that doesn't require saying something that could make it worse. Because here's the uncomfortable truth creeping underneath everything. Love can support a person. It can protect them. It can stand beside them. But it cannot fix a contradiction that's already been exposed. It cannot rewrite logic. It cannot erase recorded statements, archived interviews, years of documented identity, and it definitely cannot answer a question that doesn't have a clean answer. So the silence grows, and as it grows, it starts pulling other moments into its orbit, other comments, other interviews, other fragments that didn't seem important before but suddenly feel like pieces of a larger pattern. Take the broader culture around this situation, the way conversations happen when cameras aren't directly focused, the way certain remarks slip through and aren't corrected, the way jokes land a little too comfortably, when former players like Jeff Teague host discussions and controversial statements about families like the Johnsons go unchallenged. It doesn't just reflect on the speaker, it reflects on the environment. And when there's no pushback, no apology, no attempt to soften the impact, it leaves a mark. And then you start to notice something else. The blueprint everyone once pointed to, the idea that this family represented progress, acceptance, a model for others, starts to feel less solid, because a blueprint only works if it holds under pressure. And right now, under the weight of public contradiction, it's not holding cleanly. Even figures like Dwayne Wade once referenced that blueprint as something worth following, something real, something proven. But what happens when the real test doesn't come during a moment of celebration, but during a moment of confusion, during a moment when the narrative isn't clear, when the identity itself seems to be shifting without explanation, when the past and present don't align? That's where the cracks start to show. Not because something failed suddenly, but because maybe it was never as stable as it appeared. And then the timeline starts whispering its own questions. Go back again. 2019, a calm, confident statement, no plans to transition. Comfortable, certain, almost absolute. That wasn't vague. That was direct. And now fast forward to 2025, where the language isn't just different, it's reversed. Not adjusted, not expanded, replaced. No bridge between those moments, no explanation connecting them, just a gap. A black space in the narrative where something clearly changed, but nobody is saying what. And that gap is where suspicion starts to grow. Because when people change, they usually tell you why. When they don't, it invites a different kind of curiosity. The kind that doesn't go away. The kind that keeps circling back, looking for clues in everything else. Even comments from outside the immediate circle start to feel heavier. When Jennifer Flavin talks about structure, about how children of celebrities grow up surrounded by influence, by voices, by environments that can blur identity, it lands differently in this context. Not as a direct accusation, not as a confirmed truth, but as an idea that lingers, that asks quietly, what happens when someone grows up in a world where every version of themselves can be validated instantly? Do they find clarity, or do they keep evolving in ways that don't always connect? And now everything circles back to where it started. Because while all of this expands outward, family silence, cultural reactions, timeline gaps, outside commentary, the original trigger hasn't gone anywhere. Katt Williams is still there, still holding the same material, still capable of stepping back on stage and repeating the same point in 100 different ways. That's the real pressure. Not just the contradiction itself, but the fact that it doesn't expire. It doesn't fade. It doesn't get replaced by something new. Because it's built from AJ's own words. And those words don't disappear. So every option remains locked. Speak and risk reinforcing the contradiction. Stay silent and let the silence become the answer. Either way, the narrative doesn't resolve. It just lingers. And maybe that's the part nobody wants to admit. This isn't a scandal with a clean ending. It's not building toward a single revelation that ties everything together. It's something messier, something unresolved. A situation where the more you look at it, the less stable it feels. Because at its core, this isn't just about identity or statements or public perception. It's about control. The idea that you can define yourself on your own terms, at your own pace, without interference. But what happens when your past definitions are still visible, when they don't align with the present? When someone else, someone sharper, louder, more ruthless, decides to hold them up side by side, that's when control starts slipping. Not all at once, slowly, publicly, irreversibly. And now we're left watching a situation where nobody is fully stepping forward, nobody is fully stepping back, and the space in between keeps getting louder. The silence from the family, the unanswered questions, the missing explanations, the repeating jokes, the fixed contradiction, it's all still there, unresolved, unfinished. And the most unsettling part? This story doesn't feel like it's ending. It feels like it's waiting.